Thank you very much, Don, and thank you all for coming out on this beautiful day to share this hour of serious conversation with me. I have to tell you how much easier my life has become since I learned that as a clergyman I could keep the same sermon and find a new congregation every week. And I would thank the members of the committee for arranging this luncheon. And especially for arranging it with such soft, quiet food so that those of you who haven't finished can continue to finish your lunch. Nothing is served today that will snap, crackle, pop, or crunch and in any way disturb the audience around you. So if you haven't finished, you have my permission to keep on eating and I won't even notice. But most of all, I want to express my thanks to Don Alspaugh, who has really made my appearance possible. From the first time that he contacted me after learning I was coming to speak for Boulder Hospice, a typical communication would be Don inviting me, my explaining to him why it wasn't going to work out, his getting back to me and saying, we've taken care of that. My getting back to him with another problem, his calling me the next day and saying, we fixed that. And ultimately I saw there was no alternative, so here I am and I'm delighted to be here. I was also very touched and flattered by your characterizing me on the program as America's rabbi, until I stopped and contemplated what's happened this week to the Dallas Cowboys and the Atlanta Braves, who presented themselves as America's team. And I hope I fared better than they did. This afternoon's topic is very appropriate to the day and to the season. As Don mentioned, it was exactly 15 years ago today, October 14th, 1981, that my first book was published, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And I suddenly, to my astonishment, found myself transformed from a suburban rabbi to a nationally renowned, very busy, best-selling author. And while I allude to that, I should also pay tribute to the fact that back in the fall of 1981, it was the Christian Clergy who made my book a bestseller. The New York bookstores, the New York media were too sophisticated to notice it, totally unknown author, small publisher. And all through the Southwest and the Midwest and the West, Protestant ministers, Catholic priests found the book, gave sermons on it, gave it to people in hospitals, handed it out at funerals, and they created the word of mouth that made the book a bestseller. And I have been grateful to them ever since, and I'd like to take this opportunity to repay that debt of gratitude. But aside from the anniversary date, the book I'm going to talk to you about today is very much an autumn book. When I was young, spring was my favorite season of the year. It was the season of promise, the season of all sorts of unknown futures, and you look forward to seeing what was going to happen. As I matured, I gradually, and I'm not sure when it happened, gradually realized that I was loving autumn more than I was loving spring. Less a time of hope, more a time of reflection, and meditating on the very special beauty that comes at this time of year, the leaves changing colors, the weather turning cooler, and the sense that these days are especially and most poignantly beautiful because they will not last, because this is the special glow and the special beauty that comes before the advent of winter. I want to introduce today's talk with a true story. It happened almost exactly 200 years ago, around 1803, 1804, in a small town in Tsarist Russia. Now, you probably don't know about Jewish history in the early 19th century, that it was a particularly difficult time for the Jews in the Russia of the Tsars. They had to cope with the anti-Semitic policies of the Tsar and his administration. They had to cope with the bigotry and the prejudice of their illiterate neighbors around them, the peasants with whom they lived. But worst of all, they had to cope with a deep, profound cleavage down the middle of the Jewish community itself. Jews hated other Jews. There was a split between the Hasidim, the ecstatic, charismatic Jews on the one hand, and their opponents, the straight, conventional, rational Jews on the other. It was not simply a theological difference. It was not simply that they wouldn't worship in each other's synagogues. They didn't want their children to get to know each other. They were so bitter in their enmity that you won't believe this, but it's really true. Sometimes Jews would go to the authorities and tell lies about their opponents just to get them in trouble. And so it happened that the Lubavitcher Rebbe of that time, the founder of the Lubavitch sect of Hasidic Judaism, was imprisoned on false charges of plotting against the Tsar, languished in jail for several months until he could prove he was innocent and was freed. Now the story goes that one day, while he was sitting in prison, the jailkeeper came to him and said, "They tell me you're a rabbi and a wise man. Can I ask you a question?" Rabbi says, "Of course, ask any question you want." Jailkeeper says, "I'm not a believer. I'm not religious, but I have a lot of friends who are, and they're always after me to read the Bible. They're always telling me, read the Bible, you'll get a lot out of it. Read the Bible, you really need it. Never had time. The other night, I finally sat down to read the Bible, and I got to tell you, Rabbi, I don't know what all the fuss is about. I mean, look, page 3 of the Bible, God says to Adam, 'Where are you?'" Now, tell me, Rabbi, what kind of question is that? One man in the whole world and God can't find him? The rabbi smiles and says, "No, you didn't understand the question. God asks Adam, 'Where are you?' Not because he doesn't know where he is. He knows where Adam is. He's talking to him. God asks Adam, 'Where are you?' because he wants Adam to start asking himself, 'Yes, as a matter of fact, where am I?' For example, he said to the jailer, 'You're 43 years old, and where are you?' And when the jailkeeper heard him identify precisely how old he was astonished and taken aback. And he went back to his office and felt he had to reopen some issues he thought he had closed. That's the story. I remember the first time I ran across that story. I was in my first year of graduate school. I was 21 years old. We were reading Tales of the Hasidim by Martin Buber, and that story was one of the chapters. I remember to this day how I reacted to it. I said, "Hey, that's a nice story. I like it. I want to remember it, and someday I'll use it in a sermon. Why did they have to spoil it at the end? Why did they have to take this nice story and turn it into a cheap mind-reading trick? Ha ha, I know how old you are." Then about 20 years later, I happened to run across the story again. And now I was in my early 40s, and now for the first time I understood it. The point of the story is not that the rabbi could guess how old the jailer was. Big deal. The point of the story is that something happens to a man in his early 40s, to a woman maybe a couple of years earlier, where you suddenly realize you are looking at life differently. You suddenly realize you are no longer asking the young person's questions about life. How much will I achieve? How far will I go? What will I accomplish? You're now asking the middle-aged person's questions, the where am I questions. What has my life been about? And it's at that point you realize you are middle-aged. Middle age is not a function of the calendar. It's not a function of how many birthdays you've had, how many gray hairs you have. Middle age is an attitude toward time. When you're young, you can be extravagant with time because you've got all the time in the world. You assume you'll be around forever. You have an endless supply of years. They say, for example, that 18-year-old men are the best soldiers and the worst drivers because I can't imagine they'll ever get killed. You know how it works? Your daughter calls you from college and says, "I think I'm going to change my major. It means I have to stay another year." That's okay, isn't it? Sure. What's a year when you're 19 years old and you have an endless supply of them? Somebody is involved in a relationship that doesn't work out after 6 months. You don't feel you've been wasting your time. You feel you've been practicing your intimacy skills. And then one day, you suddenly realize you're no longer looking at time the way you did when you were young. Excuse me. It can happen when your parents die, and all of a sudden you're now the older generation. It can happen the first time you go to a funeral of somebody your own age, or the first time you become seriously ill. And all of a sudden you say to yourself, "Hey, if I'm not going to be around long enough to do everything on my wish list, what are the things I need to accomplish while I can?" And everything else will get left off if there's no time for them. There is a scene in the classic short story by Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. It's the story of a very ordinary Russian man with a very ordinary job and a very ordinary family who one day realizes that this health problem he's seeing his doctors for is something they're not going to be able to cure. And sooner or later he's going to die of it. And he says to himself, what if it was all a mistake? The way I lived, the way I treated my family, the way I did my job. What if I've been doing it wrong and now it's too late to go back and do it right? What I want to do for the next 45 minutes is share with you what I think everybody needs to know, so you will never ask the Ivan Ilyich question, what if I've been doing it wrong? How should we invest our limited amount of time so we can feel we've used it well? One of the things American society does that makes it hard for us to feel good about the way we've used our time is it insists that the only way to be successful is to finish first. You're either a winner or you're a loser. I mean, has anybody heard from Michael Dukakis recently? Or from Walter Mondale? Or all those jokes they make about the team that loses the Super Bowl and is only the second best football team in the universe? Did you see that ad they ran in the Olympics last summer in Atlanta? The ad that says you don't win silver, you lose the gold? That's got to be the dumbest thing I ever heard. I mean, to say to the second best sprinter in the universe, you are a loser, because on this afternoon somebody ran a 20th of a second faster than you did. I mean, that's crazy. What you do when you talk about if you're not a winner, you're a loser. What you do when you say there is no way to be successful except by winning, you do two things and they're both bad. First, you have just told 90% of Americans that they're losers. And the second is, even that handful of people who win, look around and say, this is what it feels like to win? I really thought it'd be nicer than this. This is what I've knocked myself out for? This is what I neglected my family for? This is what I pushed people out of the way for? This isn't as much fun as I thought it would be. The danger with becoming real good at winning is you learn to see everybody else as a competitor, and you forget what it's like really to have friends. One of the sad things in America is that for the most part, men don't have friends. You ask the average man, do you have friends? Of course, I got lots of friends. What do you do with your friends? You know, we'll go fishing together, we'll watch the football game together. Do you ever share yourself with your friends? Do you ever talk to your friends about what's bothering you, about what's scaring you, about your family, about your health, about your job? Well, no, I think we'd be uncomfortable doing that. We have learned to become so closed, so on guard with other people because we have been taught to see them as competitors. I want to give you 4 things that I think should be the ingredients of a life well spent. And the first flows from what I've just been saying. The life you can feel good about is the life you share with other people. The life you hoard for yourself grows stale, and the life you open up and invite other people into remains ever fresh. Martin Buber, the great Jewish theologian, when somebody asked him, Buber, where is God? Buber was smart enough not to give the cliche answer, God is everywhere, which is meaningless. Smart enough not to say God is found in churches and synagogues and holy people. You know what he used to say? Buber said, God is found in relationships. When two people connect with each other in an authentically human way, God comes down and fills the empty space between us so we're no longer separated. God is present in the world when people get over their individuality and their selfishness and connect with each other. There was a time in the early 70s when I was a congregational rabbi when terrible things were happening in our community. And approximately once a month, I would learn that one of the marriages in my congregation had broken down, husband and wife had separated. Stories would sometimes differ, but a typical story was a man in his late 30s, pushing 40, tired of mortgage payments, tired of orthodontia payments, tired of seeing the same faces at the breakfast table, would leave his family, grow a beard if it didn't come in too gray, trade in the station wagon for a 2-seater sports car, and start life all over again. And I'd call him into my office and I'd say, hey, I heard what's been happening with you. What's going on? And he would say to me, Rabbi, it's the hardest thing I ever did. I had to do it. This was my last chance to be happy. And I would say to him, okay, where did you get the idea that the way to be happy is to cut yourself off from responsibilities to other people? The happiest days in my life were times when I understood that people needed me. People counted on me to be there. And the worst scenario I could possibly imagine would be to wake up one morning and realize that in this whole world, nobody cared if I was still there or not. Our responsibilities to other people don't limit us, keep us from being happy. That's where we find real happiness. True story. A friend of mine, early 40s, separated from his wife and kids, living by himself, sets out for work one day. Before he sets out for work, he carefully blow dries his hair, trims his mustache, looks in the mirror, and he really likes what he sees. He's convinced that if he's going to have a problem today, his problem will be telling people that they made a mistake asking for his autograph. He's not Tom Selleck. Gets on the bus to go to work. The bus is crowded, and he has to stand. And he finds himself standing in front of this stunningly attractive young woman who's going into college. She's got a whole bag full of textbooks on her lap. This girl is so pretty, my friend can't keep his eyes off her. The whole trip he's looking at this girl. At one moment, the young woman looks up, sees this man staring at her. Their eyes lock. My friend doesn't know what this is going to lead to, but he would like to find out. So he gives the young woman his warmest, most inviting, how about it smile. The woman smiles back at him, nods, stands up and offers him her seat. He told me the story. I said to him, "You're not going to like hearing this, but you were probably her father's age." Moral of the story: you don't find happiness by cutting your ties to other people. You find happiness by sharing life with others, by accepting responsibility for their well-being. There is nothing as gratifying as knowing that there's somebody who depends on you to be there for them. The story I really like to tell to make that point is the story of the man sitting on the beach by the ocean, watching the waves come in and watching a young boy and girl play in the sand. They're building a sand castle. It's one of these architectural masterpieces, moats and towers and passages, and everything is really almost finished when you know what's going to happen. Big wave comes, knocks it flat, reduces it to wet mud. The man is sure the kids are going to burst out crying. All their work has been destroyed. But they fool him. They don't cry. They run up the shore holding hands and laughing, and they sit down to build another sand castle. And the man realizes what an important lesson these children have just taught him. No matter how good you are, sooner or later that wave is going to come and knock down what you've worked to build. And when that happens, only the person who has somebody's hand to hold will be able to laugh at it. First ingredient in the life you can feel good about: share that life with other people. Second, this is going to sound paradoxical, but I think I can make a case for it. If you want to feel good about life, you have to be prepared to accept pain as part of living. Now that sounds strange, because in American society we tend to be very pain phobic. We tend to tell people if you do it right, it won't hurt, and if it hurts, take these 2 pills, you'll feel better right away. We think if you feel pain, it's because something is wrong. When my book about bad things happening to good people first came out, I started to get letters from women telling me that when they got sick, or when they found out they had a seriously ill child, their husbands left them. And you know, the first 2 or 3 letters, I just very impressed with how mean and selfish these guys were. But the letters kept on coming. I would get 35, 40 letters like that. All of them saying the same thing: "Rabbi, I don't understand it. I know he loves me. I know he loves the children. How could he do this?" And then one day I understood it. The reason these men left was not that they didn't love their families. It's precisely that they loved them. That it hurt them so much to see somebody they love suffering. They couldn't solve the problem. They couldn't make the suffering go away. The only way they could handle it was to run away so they didn't have to watch it. It hurt them too much to see someone else in pain, and they had to flee so it wouldn't hurt them. I remember the young couple who came to see me one evening. They were going to be getting married in June. I would be officiating. We wanted to get to know each other. We're talking about the ceremony, and the young man, the prospective bridegroom, says, "Rabbi, would you be willing to make one small change in the Jewish wedding ceremony? Instead of pronouncing us husband and wife till death do us part, would you pronounce us husband and wife for as long as our love lasts?" We've talked about this. And we've decided if we ever get to the point where we no longer love each other, it's not morally right for us to be stuck with each other. I said to them, "No." I said, "No, I'm not going to do that." I said, "Listen, I appreciate where you're coming from. I appreciate the distaste for hypocrisy which causes you to make that request. Maybe you saw your parents' marriage when you were growing up and you swore, 'I'm never going to end up like that.' Maybe you had a close friend who trusted somebody who was very badly hurt by that person, or maybe you trusted somebody who was badly hurt, and you came away saying, 'I will never let anybody get close to me to hurt me like that again.' I said, what I'm hearing is you are afraid to give yourself wholeheartedly to this marriage for fear it will hurt too much if it doesn't work out. So you're going to move in with each other, but you won't entirely unpack. Part of you will be in the marriage, and part of you will be standing outside evaluating it. Not asking yourself, what can I do to make it better? But asking yourself, am I getting what I need from this relationship, or should I leave and look for another one? And I said to them, if you go in with that attitude, there is no chance in the world it's going to work. You won't care about it enough to put in the hard work to make it successful. The first time it doesn't work, you're going to walk out because you will find it too painful. You are so afraid of loving because love can hurt when it doesn't work out. I told you about all the divorces I had to deal with as a congregational rabbi. I don't worry about adults. Adults hurt, but adults heal. And if 50% of marriages today end up in divorce, 80% of divorces end up in marriage. And my experience as a pastor with second marriages has been very beautiful. People are so patient and realistic and forgiving. They really want it to work. So they can open a window and shout out into the street, "You see, I told you it was your fault." And even the divorced people who don't remarry find in themselves the capacity to see themselves as a whole person and not half of a couple. No, adults are okay. I worry about children. I worry that we are raising a generation of children who will be afraid to love because they've seen how much it hurts when love goes bad. And these are the young people who will look for intimacy without permanence, for relationships without responsibility. They will be very good at taking and not very good at giving. Very good at knowing what their needs are and totally tone deaf to the needs of other people. And the root of it all is their fear of pain, their fear of letting themselves be vulnerable. They go around anesthetized. They go around wearing a suit of armor. And it works. They feel no pain. Nothing hurts them. But they feel no love and no joy and no hope. They don't feel anything. And life is dull and insipid, and they don't know why. We have to explain to these people something about the resiliency of the human soul, the capacity of the human being to endure pain and to survive. That a broken heart is like a broken leg. It hurts desperately, but it heals, and one day the pain goes away and you're still there. We have to introduce them to people who have undergone the most excruciating of painful experiences, illnesses and injuries and crimes, and have come out and gone on living meaningful lives. We have to explain to them that you can cut your hair and your fingernails and it doesn't hurt because those are dead cells cut into your living flesh and it hurts. And that's how you know that you're alive, because you can feel pain. If you can't, if you are numb to everything, I would question whether you're really alive. So the second ingredient is to have the courage to take off the armor, to dare to love, to dare to make yourself vulnerable, to care about things deeply enough that things could hurt you, because only then will you know the joy of being fully alive. Third ingredient, the psychoanalyst Carl Jung said that by the time you get to the midpoint of your life, what you need to do is stop doing the things you're already good at and go back and fill in the spaces that were left blank when you were growing up. The second half of your life should be used to fill in all the things you never got to do in the first half. Specifically, Jung said, when we are born, every human infant has the capacity to be masculine and feminine, emotionally, not physically. What happens is society takes little girls and teaches them how to be feminine. You know, girls don't have to get an education, girls have to get a husband. Society takes little boys and teaches them how to be masculine. Boys don't cry, men don't ask directions.
That's true.
I'll tell you a story about that tonight if you're here. As a result, half of our souls never get used. Half of our souls lie there undeveloped. Jung says, second half of life, let the other half of your soul emerge. This is when women, if you have spent the first 40 years of your life going from being somebody's daughter to being somebody's girlfriend to being somebody's wife to being somebody's mother, and there was never a time when you were somebody, period, this is when you claim that right. And you're not being selfish. and you're not being irresponsible, you are reaching for wholeness. This is the point in a man's life when he realizes there is more to life than competing. When he stops seeing other men as adversaries and rivals. When he becomes a mentor. When he takes time to teach the tricks of the trade to the young people in the office. When he goes out and wants to coach a little league team and give something back to the community instead of just trying to get ahead of other people. I will never forget a conversation I once had in a car going back from Boston to my home in Natick. I had gone into Boston for an ecumenical clergy meeting. When the meeting broke up, one of the ministers there, who lived a little bit further out than I did, asked if I could give him a ride home. A man a little bit older than myself, in his early 50s. In the car driving out to his parish, he told me an amazing story. He told me that when he turned 50, he realized that for the last 15 years of his life, he had been looking forward to his best friends and colleagues having a heart attack or being caught in a scandal, so he could apply for their churches. He was the minister of a small, blue-collar church, and he felt like a failure. He disliked the people in his congregation because they were the evidence of his failure to succeed. And he thought if he could just be the minister of a large, prominent, affluent church, he would feel successful as a minister. Then when he turned 50, and he realized he was too old to be called to one of the major churches in the area, something changed in him. And he not only gave up that unworthy dream, he was embarrassed that he ever had it. And now he's a mentor to the young ministers coming up, and now he warns them and tutors them and gives them tips. And now he loves and appreciates his people because he can sympathize with their own feelings of failure. He's come to terms with his own limitations. And he talked to me about what happened when he just passed that point, and instead of feeling the competitiveness, he could relax and share what he had learned with other people. I want to contrast for you two movies that make this point. I think you'll remember them. The first one got the Academy Award the year it came out. Do you remember Chariots of Fire? About the two British runners trying to make the Olympic team? What struck me about that movie is that the two heroes of the movie, these two distance runners, never talk to each other. They never say anything to each other except good luck, may the best man win. But they feel very close because this is how men bond. Men bond by competing at the world level. They have shared something that most people have not shared, running at this speed, trying out for the Olympics, and so they feel close to each other. The cliche, the aphorism is, we teach men to be comfortable with competition and uncomfortable with intimacy. We teach women to be comfortable with intimacy and uncomfortable with competition. These men could not share themselves with each other except by running and racing against each other. But by racing, they felt close. Second movie was called The League of Their Own. Remember Gina Davis and Tom Hanks are in it? About women professional baseball players. If you haven't seen the movie, if you plan to rent it, I'm going to spoil it for you now by telling you the ending. At the end of the movie, it's the last inning of the deciding game of the Women's World Series Championship. Gina Davis, who is the best player on either team, deliberately drops the ball so her sister can be the hero instead of her. Because her relationship to her sister means more to her than winning the championship. I suspect a lot of men walked out of that movie saying, wasn't that stupid? How can you be a professional ball player and deliberately lose a game so you don't hurt the feelings of the people on the other side? I mean, can you imagine the Atlanta Braves saying, let's let the Cardinals win, it's been so long since they were in the World Series? Can you imagine the Yankees saying, let's not try too hard in this game, Baltimore deserves it more than we do? But I can imagine a lot of women walking out of that movie saying, wasn't that touching? So this year you win, and next year somebody else wins, and you're a question in Trivial Pursuit, and nobody remembers who was the champion last year. But in the meantime, you've broken the heart of somebody you claim to love. If we are going to be complete people, whole human beings, one of the things we have to do is learn the wisdom of the other 50% of the human race. Women have to learn to assert themselves and not feel that they're being aggressive or selfish. Men have to learn to share and not only to compete, and then we become whole. Fourth ingredient, and this is the key to the whole thing, this is really the indispensable one. I am convinced that in order to feel you have used your limited time well, you must know you have made a difference to the world. People can handle mortality. People can handle the knowledge that we're not going to live forever. In fact, the British writer Chesterton, in one of his essays, says, there are people who pray for eternal life and don't know what to do with themselves on a rainy Sunday. We can handle the fact we're not going to live forever. What we cannot handle is insignificance. We can't handle the frightening thought that we may live and die and nobody will notice that we have made a difference to the world. We need to know that our lives mattered. And here the good news is, to live a life that changes the world, you don't have to find a cure for cancer, you don't have to write a best-selling book, you don't have to found a company and have your name on the door. You change the world by doing little deeds of kindness regularly. Let me tell you a story you all know that makes that point. In the Bible, in the book of Exodus, when God leads the Israelites out of Egypt, he is determined to work a miracle for them so spectacular that nobody who sees it will ever doubt his power or his providence again. You remember what he does? He splits the Red Sea. He leads the Israelites across on dry land, brings the waters back to drown the Egyptian army that's following. It works, blows everybody away. Everybody who's there says, wow, the Lord will be my God forever. Read on in the very next chapter of the book of Leviticus. 3 days later, they are complaining about the food, complaining about the accommodations, about the itinerary. Nothing is good. What we learn from that is that forever is a technical term meaning 72 hours. Somebody promises to be grateful to you forever. Some guy swears he will love you forever. You can hold him to it for 72 hours, then don't push it. God realizes he has to change his tactics. God realizes you cannot nourish people tomorrow on the basis of yesterday's miracle, because no matter how wonderful yesterday's miracle was, it grows stale overnight. So instead of one spectacular miracle once in a generation, God gives the Israelites the manna. Food grows outside their tents overnight. In the morning you go out, you gather it up, you have enough to feed the family. Not as spectacular as splitting the Red Sea, not as impressive or memorable, but because it happens every day, it changes the way people thought about the world. This is the power every one of us has. Very simple recipe for feeling good about your life. 3 times a week, do something nice for somebody. That's all it takes. 3 times a week, do something nice for somebody. Don't wait till you're asked, and don't wait till you have spare time. Find the time. The way you find time for 3 meals a day, the way you find time for your favorite TV programs, find time for this. You will be astonished at how quickly you will think differently about yourself. You know why? A cornerstone of my religious faith says to me, just as our bodies are made so that certain foods and certain lifestyles are healthy for us and other foods and lifestyles are toxic, I believe our souls are made so that certain kinds of activity nourish the soul and other kinds of activity poison the soul. Human beings were meant to be good and honest and cheerful and helpful to each other. And when you do that, you feel right. You've all had the experience, haven't you, going out of your way to do somebody a favor? And when you've done it, you feel so good, so light, so absolutely right with yourself, the sense that this is the way the world is supposed to be. Human beings, when they are mean and selfish and deceitful, corrode the soul. This, by the way, is the answer to the question I have been asked innumerable times since my first book came out. I don't know how many hundreds of people come up to me and said, Rabbi, I understand your answer to why bad things happen to good people. But what about good things that happen to bad people? Why do wicked people get away with murder? Why do selfish people pull off their deeds of selfishness? My answer is they don't. My answer is you pay for everything you take in life in one currency or another. Even if the only punishment is that you don't know what you're missing out on. Now, you'll say to me, wait a minute. If you don't know what you're missing out on, what kind of punishment is that? I mean, if there's a wonderful movie that I've never heard of, do I feel deprived that I haven't seen it? No, it doesn't work like that. I don't mean to sound callous, but what I'm saying is this. A blind person doesn't know what he or she can't see. But everyone in this room who's seen a sunset, and everyone in this room who's seen the flowers come up in the spring and the leaves turn in the fall, you've got to feel sorry for a person who will go through his whole life and not see those things. In very much the same way, a mean, selfish person doesn't know what he's missing, but every one of you who has had the satisfaction of loving and being loved, of forgiving and being forgiven, of going out of your way to do something nice and feeling so good, feeling that this justifies your existence. You gotta feel sorry for a person who may make a lot of money and live in a big house and drive a fancy car and will never have those experiences. And tell the truth, you would not change places with a person like that, would you? Some years ago, they did a survey at Duke University Medical School on type A personalities. You know what they are, don't you? This hard-driving, intense, got-to-achieve everything type of person. You know, the kind of person for whom the closed-door button in elevators was invented. Their hypothesis was, because these people are so intense and driven, they will make themselves sick. Their cardiovascular systems will show signs of all this tenseness. Well, they rounded up some type A's and they ran the battery of tests on them. You know what they found? Some were sick and some were healthy. And this seems to be the difference. If you are a type A person because you enjoy the challenge of getting things done, because you really feel good when something has worked out well because of your input, you're going to be fine. You'll be healthy, average person. On the other hand, if you're a type A person because you think it's a jungle out there, because you're convinced that everybody is out to cheat you and you've got to cheat them first, because you believe you can't trust anybody, can't turn your back on anybody, can't assume anybody's telling the truth, that's the person who's going to make himself sick. Because human beings were not created to be hostile and suspicious of each other. Human beings were created so that deeds of kindness and helpfulness and generosity nourish the soul. One more point I want to take a few minutes to make, because with every passing year it becomes more and more important to me. I said earlier that one of the things that American society does that makes it hard for us to feel good about the way we use our time is this emphasis on winning, on being competitive, on seeing other people as obstacles. The other thing American society does that I cannot forgive it for, it sets the peak of life at age 25 and everything after that is downhill. You don't believe me? Try this little experiment. Go into a stationery store, look at greeting cards for middle-aged men and women. I'm not talking about 60. I'm talking about 35 and 40-year-old birthdays. They're all about loss. You're losing your vitality, you're losing your figure, you're losing your hair, you're not the person you used to be at 35 and 40. This is not only mean and not only discouraging, it's not even true. It is not true that everything after age 25 is downhill. If you know anything about the mystery writer Agatha Christie, you may know that she was married twice and her second husband was a prominent British archaeologist. A reporter once asked Agatha Christie, "What's it like being married to an archaeologist?" And she said, "Oh, it's wonderful. The older I get, the more interested he is in me." And I'll tell you something, she's right. She's right, and you don't have to be an archaeologist to feel that way. Once you get over superficial physical first impressions, older people are much more interesting than younger ones. Of course we are. We've experienced more, we've learned more, we've gotten over some of that narcissistic self-interest of young people. The fires of competitiveness in us have been banked. You know what the problem is? The problem is we have been taught to see life as an expendable resource that gets used up. When you're born, you have X number of years to live, and every birthday means you have 1 year less. Your heart is programmed to beat 2 billion times, and every day you have used up a certain number of those heartbeats. Life is like vintage wine that every sip you take of it, the level in the bottle gets lower and lower till there's almost nothing remaining. No wonder we feel discouraged at the prospect of growing older. Suppose we change that mindset. Suppose instead of looking at life as something we use up, suppose we learned to look at life as the accumulation of treasure. so that with every year that passes, you have more life than you had a year ago. Because you've met new people, you've traveled to new places, you've been exposed to new ideas, you've read new books, you have more life than you did a year ago. Learn to look at life that way, and you're not frightened by growing older. And then women don't have to dye their hair and wear inappropriate fashions, and men don't have to suddenly start running marathons and reading the Rogaine ads to pretend that they're not getting older. Then we can look forward to the end of life, not as loss, but as punctuation. We can learn to see our lives as a beautiful story. We can appreciate the story. We can understand that the story makes more sense the closer you get to the end. And only when you get close to the end of the story do you begin to understand the real significance of something that happened back in chapter 1 or chapter 2. Then we don't have to be afraid of the end of life. We can look forward to it. Our lives will have been a beautiful story. And while we may want the story to be longer, we understand that the real measure of the value of a story is not how long it is, but how good it is. And if our lives have been about sharing life with other people, if our lives have been about the courage to take off the armor and open ourselves to pain so that we can feel the whole spectrum of emotions, if our lives have been about learning the wisdom of the other half of the human race so that our souls are developed in all their wholeness, and if we have disciplined ourselves 3 times a week, at least, to do nice things for other people, we can look at the end of the story knowing it will be a story of people who have changed the world for the better and left the landscape filled with people who thanked God that the story of our lives intersected the story of theirs. Thank you very much.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.
And by the way, these 2 cute little girls are looking for a loving local grandparents. Matter of fact, this is the whole family. If you know of someone who would be interested in being a local grandparent to this family, please write to the Jackson 6, P.O. Box 1342, Longmont, Colorado, 80502. Now back to Rabbi Kushner.
The question was that when I talked about relationships, I didn't talk about our relationship to nature and to earth. You're absolutely right. I think it's a very important part of living properly. It seems to me that part of my response to autumn is an appreciation of nature, the fragility of nature, our dependence on nature, our interaction with nature. The Jewish festival of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, is very much a way of getting us outdoors and in touch with nature, with the cycle of life, the cycle of the seasons again. Beyond that, it is probably a comment that I am well chastened by, and I really ought to try and remember that when I speak on this subject. So thank you, ma'am. Yes, please.
I was taking care of my father when he was dying of cancer. We had hospice at Cape Cod, and he would not see the chaplain because she was a woman. But I did see the chaplain, and some of the things she gave me to work on with him sound very similar to these points you've given us. And I wonder if you see a connection between these points and helping a person review his life in a positive way.
The question is about a hospice experience a woman had when her father was dying. And aside from the geographical connection that where I live is not that far from Cape Cod, yes, I think that's exactly what we're talking about. Whether you're 40 and healthy, or whether you're 80 and terminally ill, the confrontation with mortality leads in the same directions. When you realize that your time is limited, when you face the issue of how can I feel I have used my time well, the 40-year-old has more time to look ahead and plan to get it right. The terminally ill patient has the opportunity to make death less frightening by reviewing how well he has used his time. My comment earlier that people are not afraid of mortality, they're afraid of insignificance. I think that applies to the terminally ill person as well. Death is less frightening. Well, let me put it the other way. In my 30 years as a rabbi, I have sat by the bedsides of many, many dying people and talked to them about how they felt about dying. And except for the rare individual, and I suspect it's probably rarer among Jews than among Christians, who was really worried about being sent to hell because he'd been a bad person, The biggest fear, the people who were most afraid of dying, were people who felt they had wasted their lives. And if you could point out to them that they had not wasted their lives, if you could point out to them that they had been loving and successful parents, devoted spouses, cherished friends, that they had left a record of good deeds behind, then death was less frightening. We can handle mortality, especially the terminally ill person is not afraid of dying. If you're really sick, death is the only cure for what you're suffering from. What the terminally ill patient needs is the knowledge that they had lived, that they had not wasted their time. Oscar Wilde has this wonderful little epigram. He says, the nicest feeling in the world is to do a good deed anonymously and have somebody find out. Maybe the most comforting message we can give someone we love who is dying is, you know, all those good things you did anonymously that you thought nobody noticed? We noticed. And, you know, our world was different because of who you were. That's the comforting message, I think, that makes death an easier passage for a lot of people. There was a hand somewhere over in the... Yes?
I was just going to ask a little, can you expand a little on that doing good deeds thing in relation to the Jewish concept of mitzvah?
Yeah, I think it's a universal tradition which every religious brand name has its own vocabulary for. The idea that, to oversimplify it grossly, God put us on earth to be nice to each other. That's what we're here for, to be nice to each other. I was speaking to the Menorah, the umbrella organization of Jewish communities in Boulder this morning, and somebody asked me about the purpose of life, and I said the purpose of life is to be a mensch. Do I need to subtitle that word, or has that entered into the vocabulary? The purpose of life is to be a mensch, to be a good person. And one of the ways you express being a good person is just, well, if you're organizationally inclined, then you do it through your church, through your synagogue, through the Rotary Club, through staffing a volunteer hotline, working in a soup kitchen. If you're not the organizational type, I was on a panel discussion once with, I forget how the topic came up, but this woman said that she's just not comfortable working in groups. She tends to be very independent-minded. And I said to her, you think maybe if you got together with a few other people who are uncomfortable in groups, you could figure out how to solve the problem? If you're more independent-minded, then you don't have to work through an organization. Just be aware, if there's a neighbor who's sick, shop for groceries for her. If somebody's indisposed and can't shovel their driveway after a snowfall, shovel it for them. Little things like that. The original meaning of the term mitzvah is a religious obligation, something we're commanded by God. Over the course of centuries, the definition has expanded to mean a good deed, to mean something you do because it is the right thing to do. And I think although the terminology may change, it is an ideal which we will find in all of our religious traditions.
Yeah, I got a question. We spend a great deal of our time at work, the daily grind, daily 9-to-5 grind, that kind of thing. What if you're in a job that you feel is not significant, you dislike your job? How can you feel worth in that?
If you don't feel that your job is significant, how can you feel that your life has meaning? You can do two things. One is, in consultation with others, exercise your imagination to find meaning in your job. A colleague of mine, for example, has written a book about work as partnership with God. And he gives some very interesting examples. He talks about a man who loads furniture for a moving company, right? You're not exactly a cancer researcher. What he does, he says, I know moving to a new community is stressful for a lot of people. So I don't simply load their furniture. I talk to them about all the wonderful things that are in store for them, the opportunities of making new friends, of meeting new situations. I assure them that it's going to work out, and when I'm done, they feel better about the move. A lingerie salesman makes a point of being especially compassionate to mastectomy patients who come in to be fitted for intimate apparel to go over their mastectomy replacements. My son-in-law is an orthodontist. When he graduated from orthodontic school, he asked me if I would say a few words to his graduating class at their party. I said, when somebody asks you what you do, don't say I'm an orthodontist. Don't say I put braces on people. Say I help people have beautiful smiles. That is, rephrase your job so that you feel you are doing something for the world. If you can't do that, if you've really racked your brain and you can't do it, be imaginative in using your free time, your weekends, your evenings, through your church, through your synagogue, through a civic organization. That's one of the reasons I'm a member of the Rotary Club back in Massachusetts where I live. One of the reasons the Rotary Club exists is that people who are looking for a way to be of service to the community and can't do it through their work can do it through this peripheral organization, through this civic organization. Even if you're working hard, and even if your work consumes more than 40 hours a week, and even if you do have obligations and family considerations at home, you ought to be able to find the time to do something like that. Question all the way back there.
No, the prayer in the beginning was beautiful, and that it included those that might just be trying to handle the pain in their lives, and you know that everybody has their 40 years in the wilderness, Moses. And I was wondering if you'd share your experience with that, where you might have been angry with God, overcome by the frustration or the disappointment about people around you, especially in your capacity as rabbi dealing with people in your relationship for so many years. And what has been your experience in those dark times?
The question is about how I personally have dealt with pain, with disillusionment, with spiritual darkness as a possible guide to other people who might be going through similar periods in their own lives. The full answer would really be my 1-hour lecture on When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which is the book I wrote after our son died at age 14. If I can just give you a thumbnail summary of it, leaving the theology out for some later conversation. What I learned is people going through a hard time want consolation, not explanation. I learned that why me is not a question, it's a cry of pain. And we help the person who cries out, why me, not by answering her question, but by easing her pain. Gathering with the families who had lost loved ones in the bombing, I asked them, it's been 3 months, what has helped you survive? And every single one gave me the same answer. It was not religious faith, which is what I would have expected. You know what the answer was? Community. Community. Knowing that we were not alone, having neighbors, having strangers come up and tell us how bad they felt for what we were going through. That's what saves you. You know why? Because when something bad has happened to you, there is a corner of your brain that insists on trying to make sense of the world. This is the corner of the brain where superstitions are born, and this is the corner of the brain that comes up with a before and after scenario. You did something mean. You're going to know where you are, and you see that they shun you. The woman who has been left alone by her husband's death or divorce represents something so frightening to her best friends that they are uncomfortable around her because it makes them realize how vulnerable they are. So although they know they should call her and visit her, they can't bring themselves to. They understand it's their limitation that keeps them from reaching out to her, but she doesn't know that. She thinks she's been rejected by her husband, rejected by God, rejected by her best friend. She must be a terrible person. When the community rallies around a person like that, it's the message of reassurance that we care about you, you're really a good person. The example I used yesterday at Boulder Hospital, your best friend says, what did I ever do to deserve this? He really doesn't want you to tell him all the things he's done to deserve this. He wants the reassurance that you're a good person. Yeah, I went through a time where I was very angry at God that our son was born with an incurable illness. When I thought I had a deal with God and I had kept my end of the bargain and God had defaulted on his. And ultimately I came to a resolution which permitted me to not only to love God, but to invite God to help me deal with my pain and my problem so that I was able to survive. And this is what I have seen other people do. I've seen people turn to God, and I have seen God come to people in the incarnation of doctors and nurses and therapists and friends and neighbors to let them know that they're not alone, that they are cherished, that we feel bad for them. And that's what works.